morning and welcome to the flash session of the European Audiovisual Observatory. My name is Susanne Nikoltchev. I am the Executive Director of the Observatory and I'm very happy to speak to you on artificial intelligence in the audiovisual sector. And as announced, I will do so in light of the latest market and legal developments. During this interesting conference, you already listened to many interesting presentations and discussions, but I believe there are aspects that have been little or not at all discussed during the conference. This is, for example, the case for the role of VOD platforms and for copyright. These are therefore the two topics on which I would like to focus. But before we get to this, let me flash you with 3 questions that shed some light on the observatory itself and on the reason why I was asked to give this presentation. So here comes our first question. What is the observatory? The observatory is a part of the Council of Europe. To be precise, it is an enlarged partial agreement. It has 40 members of the Council of Europe. In addition, it has the members European Union and Morocco. The observatory was established in order to contribute to enhancing transparency of the audiovisual sector through the provision of information. This is, as you may imagine, not a small task, and in addition, one that keeps permanently changing. Technical developments, including artificial intelligence, are driving these changes. So let's get to our flash number 2. What kind of information do we provide? Our information deals with market and legal developments. When we talk about market information, we mean information on the size and structure of the European audiovisual sector, on production, financing and circulation of European works, but also on the establishment, presence and ownership of audiovisual services and some other items. When we talk about legal information, we mean the main legal instruments on EU and national level, sometimes even regional level. We also mean rules and agreements concerning the cinema sector, but also freedom of expression, media, competition issues, and much, much more. What is important to all this information is it has to be factual, reliable, unbiased, and up to date. Let's deal with our third flash. Who monitors for whom? You may wonder how many people we employ at the observatory to follow, describe and analyze the most important market and legal developments in the sector and in Europe and sometimes beyond. Now we are 25 permanent staff. What do? We do research, we coordinate, foremost and very importantly, we cooperate. Because we need a wide European network, or I should actually say networks, of experts that help us to fulfill our task. And we are doing that for all professionals in the audiovisual sector. Actually, we consider that our information has strategic value, in that it helps, for example, decision makers to make informed choices, policymakers to evaluate the impact of existing policies and possibly step in if they see a need for change or development. And obviously also the professionals who want to claim their rights, for example, to proper remuneration. And since I'm addressing here professionals, this is really a welcome occasion to speak to you. And I do think we are ready to address the first question, namely the role of video on demand. I would like to approach this question by exploring, first of all, the relevant context. That is to understand better what we mean when we talk about video on demand platforms. And to this end, I have the opportunity to bring in my colleague, Gilles Fontaine, who heads the Department for Market Information. Okay, so Gilles, you have recently looked at the economic situation and characteristics of the VOD market, and I think you can help us therefore well with putting things into the right context. So how important are VOD services? That's maybe the crucial question to start with. Can you fill us in, please?
Yes, hello. Maybe I should start mentioning that the video-on-demand world is not limited to the subscription-based services, you know, the Netflix likes. It also includes many categories of on-demand services. Just to name one, the possibility to access to the programs of a TV channel at any time. That's what we call catch-up television or replay. And I would like to say that on-demand services seems to me rather good news in terms of diversity. If you consider that you can have access at a TV program at any time, even if you'd missed it because it was aired too late. And theoretically speaking, more players providing audiovisual content is also in theory beneficial. And I believe we can also say that some SVOD services, just because they needed to be innovative, have brought new narratives and also dealt with topics which were quite absent of the mainstream television channels. But these ones are catching up rapidly. But it's true that, on the other hand, on-demand challenges the way the audiovisual sector was functioning in many respects. And to me, the most important questions remain open. Do the on-demand services contribute to increase the resources of the audiovisual sector, or is it a simple transfer of resources from the, let's say, legacy players to the new entrants? And the same goes for the impact on the production of European content. On the one hand, new services mean new opportunities for European producers. But will these new opportunities compensate if the legacy players cannot invest anymore what they used to? That's the open question.
Thank you, Gilles. So I think we already have a more detailed picture of video-on-demand services and also the dynamics that the various business models have caused. But is there really a shift from the more traditional media to video-on-demand? And if so, how would we know about that?
Well, we can use several indicators just to try to be clear about that. The first one could be time spent watching video content. And here we have interesting UK figures. And these UK figures show that linear television, live television, represent about 50% of all the time spent looking at video. And all the rest goes to all forms of on-demand services, from catch-up television to video sharing platform or subscription. So it's 50% for linear television. And the figure is even more impressive when you focus on people age 16 to 34, let's say young adults. And here it's not 50% for linear TV, it's rather 20% for linear TV. So that's a kind of impressive figure. And another way to answer the question is to look at the share of on-demand in the total revenues of the audiovisual market. And here the proportion is still small. On-demand services account roughly for 12% of the total market. But the share of on-demand services is growing fast, and it is growing fast in particular in the context of the COVID-19 crisis, of course, which has clearly boosted the use of on-demand services.
So again, we are getting the picture of something that is moving and obviously moving in a certain direction. And as you mentioned, COVID has had a little bit hand in accelerating all of this. Now, what does artificial intelligence precisely do? How does it influence the VOD services if you look at it from a market perspective?
Well, first of all, recommending content goes with the very idea of on-demand. You have huge catalogs, and you are no longer guided by the programming schedule of a TV channel. And that's where artificial intelligence comes in. But it doesn't come in for all services. For instance, some niche services with less titles may rather use human recommendation. But when it comes to AI, some services use very simple algorithmic systems, such as, for instance, just promoting simply the most successful films. It is true also that other VOD services build on many data, bits by analogy with other users. You know, it's the typical people who watch this also watch that. And some services also combine this with personal information. With personal information, if they manage to gather some, it is, for example, complicated to understand who is whom when you have a family subscription. I think we should also nuance the weight of artificial intelligence as regard on-demand services. First, most consumers subscribe to several SVOD services. They use also catch-up television services. They watch video sharing platforms. So if they are the so-called artificial intelligence filter bubbles, it seems to me that we are rather in several bubbles rather than in only one. That was my first nuance. The second one is pretty straightforward. In my view, it is likely that recommendations from friends, reviews, and of course, marketing play also a significant role in the way we choose what we are going to watch. So let's not imagine a face-to-face relationship with artificial intelligence. There are many ways for us to choose the programs that we are going to watch. And my last nuance would be that we should consider that the rationale of an on-demand services is, of course, to retain its viewers, meaning that the on-demand services have rather to demonstrate to their clients the depth of their catalogs, rather than focusing the consumer on a limited part of it. So I'm not sure that when artificial intelligence is used in that case, it's aimed at focusing the consumer only on a limited number of programs. It is rather intended to widen the interest of the consumer for the catalog. So I would nuance the weight of AI in the case of on-demand services.
Well, thank you, Gilles. So we have seen from the economic side a little bit what we're actually talking about. We've also seen the impact that VOD might have on traditional services and how certain things can be intensified by artificial intelligence, even so this might also be a factor of traditional business models trying to keep their customers. Now, if we are in this rather colorful picture, then usually there is also a lawyer who might want to step in. And I think this is the point to say goodbye to Gilles and thank you very much for your contribution, and to bring in indeed the lawyer of the Observatory, the head of Department for Legal Information, Maja Cappello, who can shed some light on how the current legal framework addresses artificial intelligence in the context of VOD and online services. So have the observations that Gilles just shared with us, have they already met their legal counterpart? So Maja, can you please fill us in?
Of course. When it comes to legislation, we know this comes always with a little bit of delay compared to market development. So if I can start with VOD services, these have already been dealt with by a piece of legislation that dates back to some years already, that is the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. But this directive does not deal with AI as such. In particular, there is one specific issue that concerns the use of AI with regards to media, and that is diversity and pluralism. Gilles already touched upon that. Now, those who are old enough to remember the times when we could count on the fingers of one hand the number of channels available in one country, and when newspapers were called papers because of a reason, this might seem even exaggerated, because if there is one thing we have available today is a huge load of information. There are scores and scores of TV channels and newspapers. They are just one click away. So it could even be said that the only aspect that really prevents us from accessing all this information are not really the algorithms, but rather the paywalls, because it's limited what you wish to pay for in accessing the news. But precisely because the information offer is so overwhelmingly broad, people look for filters. And if there is one thing that AI does really well, that is to filter. Now, video on demand or news services, they can carry out this personalization for any of the users based on their personal viewing, the reading history, the preferences. And this has a downside, the so-called filter bubbles. These occur especially when algorithms filter out facts and different viewpoints, which you would not access because you're not searching for them. And this leads to a reinforcement of deeply held viewpoints and even prejudices. And in the case of VOD, the recommendation algorithms, they work, first of all, with the data provided by the users themselves. That is exactly the viewing history. So as long as there is no interest shown into specific content, this will never be recommended, because the AI system has not been taught to do it. It hasn't learned it yet. On a global scale, this can be very dangerous because it can have implications for cultural diversity. This was for the VOD services. When we look at online services, the story is slightly different, because there are some new rules in the pipeline. The Digital Services Act, which has been tabled by the European Commission last December, will introduce transparency rules for the very large online platforms, that is, those with more than 45 million users on a European scale. Only for these online services and not for VOD services, there will be an obligation to reveal the main parameters used in the recommendation systems, that is, the recipe. And then there is also another proposal, which has very recently been tabled in April, that is a regulation proposal in order to harmonize the rules on artificial intelligence. So the discussion is likely to become very heated. So the Observatory has plenty of developments to follow on this.
That's good to hear. We won't get out of work. I would like to add maybe that Maja is currently with her team conducting a series of webinars on the Digital Services Act. So for those of you where now the interest just got up, you can look at this on our website. All the webinars are filmed, and one of them focuses on gatekeepers in the DSA packages. So the question being asked is, what about video on demand? Now, let us move, however, to a topic that I don't think has been touched upon today or yesterday in the conference, namely copyright. At the Observatory, we know, however, that copyright always plays a role for the audiovisual sector. It's maybe one of the most dominant and faithful legal issues. And therefore, I would be highly surprised if it wasn't also a subject for the discussions around artificial intelligence. Maja, how do you see that?
Of course, one of the biggest fears actually raised by AI is twofold. First of all, the replacement of the humans by the machine, so all the implications for the labor market. We have more and more examples of this also in the audiovisual sector. We have plenty of creative intervention by AI, for example, script writing or music composition, just to name a few examples. But then there is the very specific copyright issue. That is, can machines be copyright holders? So what is the issue of the copyrightability of works made by machines? So the main question is, if you agree that a machine can create a work, can this machine also hold the rights? Or in the opposite case, can we say that a person can, or a company can be the copyright holder of a work created by a machine? What is the relationship? Now, the answer to these questions is not only one. It will actually depend on the countries. In common law countries, for example, there are already some rules that protect computer-generated works. This is the case of the UK, for example. But in the continental law tradition, where actually the accent is set on the personality and the creativity, this would not be possible. Only a physical person could be an author. This is the case of Spain and Germany, for example. And then you have a third group of countries that deal with the authorship in the sense that they are making it difficult to protect copyright-generated works. Not prohibiting it, but making it difficult. That's the case of the US, for example. So this is one side, copyright to protect the works. But then AI can also be used to hunt the pirates. It can be used to find and remove copyright infringing materials on the internet. But depending on how algorithms are programmed, how they are taught and what the learning process they are going through, there can be also a big downside, that is the false positives, which can have a very profound impact on freedom of expression, of freedom of internet users. And here the big problem is that AI is not a human. It's the lack of humanity. That is one of the biggest drawbacks of AI. Because filtering algorithms, they are extremely efficient, extremely powerful in addressing and removing potentially harmful content, but they cannot match humans in making nuanced decisions, especially when legal areas can be very complex, such as parody, satire, double sense, nuances that machines simply cannot get.
Well, it's a certain relief to not only have heard from you that the Observatory will continue to have to follow the developments and will continue to have a lot of work as a legal framework, but we as humans are not entirely obsolete in a world with AI. And with this, I'm sure we have not yet exhausted all the issues. There are certainly more points from a legislative perspective or legal perspective. And what are those? Maybe you want to complete the picture, Maja.
Well, yes, there is much more. We have just touched upon script writing, music, but that's not the only thing that AI can do for film production, for example. AI can also provide the actors, or can make the actors younger, older, can even make them resurrect. We can have dead people coming back on screen thanks to AI. And AI is great in order to create digital extras. So, as you may imagine, all these technological developments, they raise personality rights issues, very serious ones. And these legal issues are regulated by law, but also by contracts. And contracts, of course, they are not always easy to enforce for the weaker part, when this part is not there anymore. There is a dead actor brought back on the screen. There is also an even darker side of the story, that is the deep fakes. Deepfakes can be used in harmful ways. First of all, you can have commercial misappropriations. Deepfakes can be used for false endorsement of products, or even for identity abuse. Just imagine a very well-known politician that is spreading false information about sensitive matters like defense or today health, or inciting to hatred. But then that politician is not the one. It was an AI-produced deepfake. Well, that is a serious problem. And then we have another area, maybe less dangerous but still worrisome, which is personalized advertising and the use of personal data. This huge amount of data that is used to target advertising can be brought together both in legal and illegal ways. And such data is a very important commodity for any advertiser, because it can be used to individually target the ads on online services and therefore make it more interesting for the users. And at the same time, data can also be collected in more subtle ways through search engines or social media, connected devices, and the users might not always be aware of all the data that are very easily given away without even thinking about it twice. So one could say that at the same time you have a better experience, but also more risks. So the common sense expression, with great power comes great responsibility, is really true in this case, because AI has an enormous potential, both for good and for evil. It's fascinating and scary at the same time. And you will always have some that tend to worry, while other ones will highlight all the marvelous things that can be achieved with these tools. And this is also the reason why we at the Observatory decided to look into it. It's very fascinating what's happening in the audiovisual sector. So we recently published a report where we took the time to dive into opportunities and challenges, to look both at the good and the bad sides of AI with regard to the journalistic sector and the film sector. And if I had to summarize, just one main finding is probably there is no single vision on how AI should be regulated, but we notice that there are certain principles that come again, and again, and that is in the minds of most policymakers. Explainability, trust, privacy, pluralism, but also freedom of expression, creativity, innovation. So if we manage to combine all these principles, one could say that AI could be a blessing for humanity. Of course, unless all the fears that we are seeing today of a dystopian future will become real, but we are not there yet, fortunately.
Well, thank you, Maja. And I think you have already said a very nice last word actually on the artificial intelligence. And I can invite only all of you to look at our website and to make sure that you catch all these reports that we prepare and put at your disposal. And I'm also sure that artificial intelligence lends itself very well for many more conferences. Thank you to both heads of departments of the Observatory. Thank you, audience, for giving us the time to present all of this. Please keep interested in our work. You'll find a lot of information on our website, and I encourage you to get in touch with us. If you have specific interest, let us know. And then it remains for me to wish you the best of luck with the remainder of this conference. Many good wishes from the European Audiovisual Observatory.